All right, hello and welcome everybody to this IAAM session with Peter Mark Adams. Peter, as I already said in the pre-bit, but again, thank you for being up for sharing this material with us. And I think that people are going to really resonate with it so much. So thank you again for joining us. And for those that haven't had the chance to meet Peter before, Peter Mark Adams is an author, poet, and essayist specializing in the ethnography of ritual, sacred landscapes, esotericism, consciousness, and healing. A philosophy graduate, Peter pursues advanced studies in iconology, iconography, Renaissance art, and material culture with the Warburg Institute School of Advanced Studies. His published works include The Visible Gods, an ethnography of the cult of Mithras, which is forthcoming, Ritual and Epiphany in the Mysteries of Mithras, two esoteric tarots, the Hagia Sophia, Sanctum of Kronos, the Power of the Healing Field, Mystai dancing out the mysteries of Dionysus, the Game of Saturn, decoding the Solabusca Taraki. I'm going to pop several places that you can find Peter, including Facebook and Instagram and his website. But I'm going to hand it over to you, Peter, for what you have to share with us today.
Okay, thank you. Before I begin, I'd just like to briefly acknowledge the contribution of Gordon White to the occult community. As probably everyone knows by now, Gordon passed in Peru while engaged in research. That was about a week ago. He died of natural causes. His contribution to occulture was profound, whether through his writing, his weekly Rune Soup podcast, which cover absolutely astounding range of topics. And I was always in awe of Gordon's ability to assimilate information and rephrase and reframe it to drive the conversation forward. It was absolutely exceptional communication ability that he had. And of course, his online training, his loss will continue to be keenly felt for some time. Of Gordon's writing, one of my favorite books is Animistic, which is this one. I was really thrilled to read it, so much so I wrote an extended review of it. This work I felt brought a much needed focus to the centrality of animism and an ethnographic perspective in the arena of occult understanding and practice. And you know, I salute Gordon for that. And in a sense, animism is at the very core of what we're going to talk about today, which I'd like to dedicate to Gordon's memory. So with that said, we'll make a start. And what I'd like to do is share, if I can.
Go ahead. I'll let you know that it's up and going, Peter.
Great. Let's see if this works. How's that?
We see it very well.
Super. So the topic, as probably everyone here knows, is the visible gods of Mount Nemrut, the astroethnography of a Hellenistic ritual landscape. It's in three parts, a very brief overview just to situate the topic. And then we'll look at the domain of the visible gods, and then secondly, the lion horoscope. And that'll be clearer as we go forward. General map of Anatolia in roughly the Hellenistic period. And you see Khomeini down in the southeast corner there. Looking at a closer up portion of the map, you can see Samosata was the capital of Khomeini, the kings of Khomeini. And in the top right-hand corner, there's a group of mountain peaks which are part of the Taurus Mountains. And in there, you'll find Mount Nemrut. And you'll also find, which was described as a hierothesion, a sacred site, plus two other sacred sites all grouped together. down in the left-hand corner, we're not discussing that today. Doliche, of course, was one of the Mithraic sites in a cave. Okay, so moving forward, this is what we want to discuss. Mount Nemrut, over 2,000 meters, and on the top of it, you have this enormous mound, which is called a tumulus, but nobody's ever broken into it. Nobody's ever excavated into it because it's made out of a massive number of small stones. So, it's like scree. I mean, your feet will either sink into it or slide away. And every time somebody's attempted to dig to see if the burial is at the heart of it, it just collapses. So quite how they constructed it. It's like 50 meters high, 150 meters across, and 150 odd meters in circumference. So, okay, so in front of it, to the east and to the west, there's two terraces, and this is the eastern terrace. And basically, it's comprised of these colossi, these 9-meter tall seated statues. In front of them, a line of stelae showing the king shaking hands with the deity. Two lines representing the Macedonian and the Persian ancestors of the Khomeini kings, and an altar to the fore. So this has been quite a puzzling artifact for many years. One of the reasons that it remains so obscure, I feel, is that the visual culture of modernity doesn't really match the visual culture of pre-modern times. So for us, in modernity, almost all our visual culture is what you call naturalistic or representational. We interpret all signs as symbols, allegories, metaphors, or just simply direct representation. And while that's true for pre-modern cultures, there's another leg which animism brings to visual culture. And we can summarize that in terms of two concepts, totemism and analogism. So the totemism is anything which shares qualities with a deity or spirit, and it could be a scent, a color, a stone, a metal, so that it will be efficacious in virtue of its nature, in virtue of the fact that it shares qualities with a spirit or deity. And similarly, any ritual action which mirrors that undertaken by deities in their myth cycle will be efficacious by definition. Okay. So whereas naturalistic visual culture is shifted towards meaning, a animist visual culture is shifted towards action, to what a thing does rather than what it means. Okay, and so when we take this understanding and begin looking at Mount Nemrut, it gives us a whole different perspective, because most of the archaeology written about this site simply dismisses it as a grandiosity, as a vanity project. Okay, because from a modern perspective, that's all it could possibly be. But what I hope I'll show you tonight is that the level of care that went into the construction of this site is so far beyond the requirements of demonstrating power, for instance. The precision that's been brought to its construction is of an order above what anyone might expect. And that's what I want to explore with you. And then explore what are the implications of that for our understanding of kingship and the use of this site in the Hellenistic period. So looking top down, that's the tumulus, the vast mound. We have the East Terrace and the West Terrace. And looking at the East Terrace from, again, the plan, we see that we have the colossal statues there, 5 of them on the left, and we have the two lines of ancestral stelae. And again, the altar. But the main thing here is that there's no apparent symmetria. And that's, for me, the first clue that something bigger is going on, because symmetria meant commensurability with the divine. And we find that back in Polyclitus in the 5th century. It's right at the heart of Plato's Timaeus in the 4th century. And even Vitruvius in the 1st and 2nd century CE repeated this notion that symmetria is central. And this is one of the most important ritual sites in the Khomeini kingdom. So if there's an asymmetry, there must be a good reason for it. And this is my findings now are, I must say this right up front. I'm no astronomer. This detailed work is all due to Maurice Creans, who has done the hard analytical analysis of the site to come up with this information. The lines extended from those asymmetrical forms converge on a ridge line 23 kilometers away, where the constellation Leo and its brightest star Regulus and the sun would have risen in that age. So the azimuth, which is just the number of degrees based on a compass fixed to north, has the most remarkable convergence. And that begins to tell us something about the deeper meaning behind the structure. Regulus was the royal star in Babylonian times, so 2000 BC, and again under the Achaemenid, the Persian Empire, from around 1000 BC forward. And because the Hellenistic kings claimed descent both from the Macedonians and from the Persian royal line, Regulus is like a marker for them of the dynastic royalty. So how that works is this. We have these statues. If we just put them back together, we can see that they're all named, that they have Greek and Persian names. This is a syncretic kingdom par excellence, and they all relate to a specific planet. So that when we search for that particular sequence of planets, we find that they were all rising at 6:58 a.m. on the 29th of January, 91 BCE. In other words, the statues exactly mimicked the sky at that time. And the argument here is that this would be the moment of investiture of the king Antiochus I. And what we have to understand is why the alignment of the colossal statues and these planets was so important. Because if you look at this, Mars, for instance, is on the extreme right of the horizon. And when we look at the colossal statues, Mars is also on the extreme right. So given that those statues are facing into the dawn, they're on the wrong side. Mars on the horizon would be on my right hand. The statues behind me, Mars would be on the left hand. It's only if you turn in the space does there symmetry emerge. And we have to remember that symmetry is a commanding principle for this kind of sacred architecture. In other words, the mediation required to invest somebody as a king required the intermediation of a priest turning from the visible horizon to the horizon of the gods behind him. In other words, the investiture is the connecting of that king with this dynastic grouping of planets as reflected in the statues behind him. I hope that's it's not too convoluted, but we okay? JD, are we okay?
We are a-okay.
Okay, good. I'll go on then. Underneath the colossal statues were arranged these, what are called dexiosis reliefs, which show the king shaking hands with the deities. And the deities are arranged in the same sequence as the colossal statues above them, and they preserve the sequence of planets rising on the horizon. So there's like a stepping down taking place. First, the planetary grouping ritualistically turned to the statues, the colossi, and beneath them, the ritual action. We talked about the analogism as efficacious in its own right, so that the handshaking, which was not a normal friendly gesture in that day and age, it was a ritually imbued gesture. It had connotations far beyond recognition. It was a kind of swearing into communion with. So what I'm suggesting is that all of these elements lock together to bring the king into communion with the gods, because the planets are gods in this day and age. Then the gods are not somewhere behind them. They are themselves energetic presences. And so the ritual process of investiture would have, so to speak, earthed that energy from the sky to the land, from the land to the king. And what would it have meant for him to be invested? We have to think about that a little. What was investiture, given that he was born of a royal line? Why would he need to be, so to speak, invested in it? And I'd like to throw out the concept of the king's two bodies. And this is ritually attested. The earliest I can find is Queen Hatshepsut in Luxor, where her mortuary temple depicts the god Khnum, the potter god, fashioning two small figures on his pottery wheel, one being the car of Hatshepsut as a person, the other being the royal car, the car that was common of the ancestral line of all the kings of Egypt that were ever, from the beginning of time, from the origins of time, that first time when the gods walked upon the planet. So that investiture links, in modern parlance, the energy body of the king with the energy body of all the royal ancestors, so that they, so to speak, lean in upon him. Some part of the identity needs to be shifted or submit to this larger identity. And this is the mechanism by which it was accomplished. So the mechanism in Egypt was the Temple of Luxor, which was expressly designed to enact this ritual on a yearly basis, to renew the king's sense of this, the overshadowing of the divine car, which was not his own car. It was the car of all the ancestral royals back to the beginning of time. And the same ritual appears to be enacted here as the investiture of Antiochus I. That's the first section. I mean, probably best if we leave questions till the end, unless you have something to chip in, JD. I'm not sure.
No, I think you're right to do that. So you just carry on, and there'll be time. There might be some things to review in the earlier section, but I think if you're happy to carry on.
Okay, so the principal concepts we covered, just to recap, are the symmetria and the apparent asymmetry of the site surrenders itself to a larger symmetria. And symmetria is commensurability with the divine. Um, we also mentioned rituality as the mechanism for locking in place the energetic transfer that this ritual landscape has been designed to encompass. Um, and so I'll move now to the west terrace on the other side of the mound. Um, and again, there it is on the west. And when we look at it, it has slightly different arrangement. The same figures are there, but they're arranged slightly differently. So that um, the line of the dynastic gods, the five planets, um, the line of the shaking hands, the deoxys with the gods, and the ancestors, the Persian ancestors, are all aligned on a 241 degrees azimuth. And that would point towards sunset on the shortest day. The Macedonian ancestors, which would be Antiochus's mother's line, whereas the Persian ancestors are his father's line, um, it, are facing the colossi. The ancestral, um, the maternal ancestors face east rather than west. And a line drawn from them is on the same 65 degrees, pointing towards the rise of Regulus, the royal star, in the east, as everything else looks west. Okay. So one of those stelae is the so-called lion horoscope. And it's this lion figure covered in stars. So let's look at that. He's got like 19 stars on his body, and that corresponds to the constellation of Leo as it's expressed in Eratosthenes and Hipparchus. So there's no doubt that's what they're representing here. He has the star Regulus at the chest of over the heart, and a new moon conjunct with Regulus. Above the lion, you see the flaming one of Heracles. Well, we know that's Mars. The shining one of Apollo is Mercury. The radiating one of Zeus is Jupiter. So it's the same dynastic planets reorganized, so to speak. And when we project those against the sky, and this combination, this sequence, this clustering together occurs once in 10,000 years. Okay. So somebody had to work this out. And I'm assuming they worked it out because they had access to the Babylonian star charts. Because I don't know how you would do it otherwise. They didn't have Stellarium as a program to run those days. This had to be worked out. So the sequence of the planets and Regulus conjunct the moon only occurs once, 14th July, 7 p.m., sundown, in 109 BCE. And the suggestion is that this is the other side of the investiture of a king. This is a memoriam to Antiochus the first father, Mithridates the first. And that's pretty well exactly as they would have seen it at that time. So as I said earlier, this grouping rises in the east and sets in the west, and so to speak, locks in place the energies, which are the energies of gods, presiding over and informing the life of this dynasty. The role of the ancestors, in the Hellenistic period, the king was not divine, although he was accorded divine honors. Okay, it was a very important distinction for them. Only became divine upon death. And so it looks like Antiochus has arranged this entire ritual landscape for his posthumous existence as a member of the ancestral line, so that all of the offering tables set out in front of the stele of the ancestors are enlivened by a priesthood. And on the back of the colossi, there's a large text called the Nomos, which is proclaiming itself as divinely inspired text. And it provides a description of the rituals that need to be enacted on this site, who should enact them. That's rituals and festivals, the establishment of a priesthood and musicians funded from specific lands in the kingdom. In perpetuity, it would be a hereditary priesthood. So the notion was that this ritual landscape would function as a spiritual engine into the future, so to speak, earthing divine energies through the planets, through the landscape, through the good intentions of the ancestors, to the land and its people. Okay, so just want to give two references here that you may find very useful if you want to look some of this up. Maurice Crin's original paper, The Discovery of the Colossal Coronation Horoscope of Antiochus I, and that's the reference. It's a PDF, you can download it. And Visual Style and Constructing Identity in the Hellenistic World. It's excellent. Cambridge University Press and Versluis. So
Amazing, Peter. Let me.
that seems too short a presentation, but actually we did it. I could add a lot more about the fact that the belief system is anchored in a kind of fusion of Middle Platonism, Neo-Pythagoreanism, and Stoicism. So, for instance, Plato's Timaeus is like a foundational text, not only when it was written, but for the next 2,000 years, it continued to be. It's foundational to understanding the Hellenistic mindset. But I suspect there are distinctive elements of Neo-Zoroastrianism, which are difficult to articulate in a Hellenistic context because they become so blended. I mean, architecturally, this terrace-based structure is typically Persian. And wherever the Persians had a major impact in Anatolia under the Achaemenid Empire, they always went for these large grand stairways onto terraces kind of architecture. It's very distinctive, and not at all like the Hellenistic architecture. So when I look at this site, it looks to me more Persian, even more pre-Zoroastrian than it does a Hellenic site. And yet it's thoroughly imbued with Hellenistic metaphysics and values. So my approach to this material is because of the cult of Mithras fits in with all of this somehow. But looking at the Roman cult of Mithras, it's not at all evident how it could have emerged from this.
Okay.
Kind of, because the disjunction between the two is so large. And what I suspect is the cult of Mithras did emerge exactly from these Hellenistic kingdoms, and that it was an elite mystery cult, whereas what we've just seen is a public ritual site in essence. Okay, and that's the difference between the. So what I'm working on right now is to see how the cult of Mithras was compatible with and emerged from these Hellenistic kingdoms. So this was like a small bypass out from the main theme, but it was so fascinating
Oh, it
I couldn't
is.
resist exploring it. And, hats off to Maurice Crins for doing the basal, the foundational work with the azimuth calculations
Hmm.
and so on. That, and also running Stellarium to actually fix the positions of the planetary groupings at specific days and times. And I say, once in 10,000 years would that grouping have been seen. And, the fact that they could capture that, calculate it, and then organize the entire ritual site, which is in essence the top of the mountain. I mean, it includes that mound of stones 50 meters
Yes.
high, includes layering these two terraces, carving the statues and erecting them, all the stelae for each of the groups of ancestors, like 14 or 15 ancestors on each side. And also there are a series of investiture stelae, which I haven't been able to see yet, but they do depict the king, so to speak, investing his son. And that's why
Mm.
we feel very strongly that the two dates represent investiture dates.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
no, it's utterly fascinating. And I think we had spoken in the pre-session chat. I was more familiar with the lion horoscope and its
Mm,
relationship to an actual alignment that was going on than for the statues that make up Nimrud. But one of the things I would like to take it back to, if it's okay, is at the very beginning, you started to draw some distinctions between how, where we go with things when we're looking at things from a lens of a more naturalism to what we're doing when we're looking at things in a more animistic
yeah.
fashion.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that for a lot of people, some of the just as a way that it sits within the um, context of this group, a lot of us practice talismanic magic, and there is
Yeah.
uh, it's not a clear cut thing, but a lot of its efficacy and power is a lot of times meant to be almost derived from a form of natural magic. It's
Yeah.
combining like astrological magic and that's timing with a form of natural correspondences that are related to it. Don't worry, we'll get to the questions that folks had asked, but someone asked a question about this earlier in the chat. Um, so my thought with you is more that when we think of astral magical practices in a broader way,
Hmm.
they're not confined only to ones that would only lean on natural magic, correct? Like you
Yeah.
can engage in this way, and so you would argue that these sites are the force of what they're trying to accomplish is primarily through an animistic perspectives that they are using, correct?
They're totally immersed in animistic perspective. There isn't another reality.
Yeah.
I mean, everything is alive, and it can be uh, utilized symbolically, but equally it has a force at the same time. And when you fashion something to represent something else, it has a force by almost by definition.
Mhm.
It's, the terms are suntamata and symbola. So, the intrinsic
Yeah,
uh,
coming from
aliveness
energy.
of something is the suntamata. It's because it's a substance. And the symbola is the assemblage, so to speak, of
Mhm.
that or of diverse substances. And and the key thing here, though, is not just that, but the ritualization of the space.
Yes.
In other words, the intensity, the aliveness of what is alive brings it to another pitch. It's alive to such an extent that you begin to see the spirits as figures, a bit like ayahuasca. Nature emerges uh, fully figured, so to speak, as alive as you and I. I don't know else
Yes.
how that, and that's true for the stones, the symbola, the assemblage of these statues. Under, I'm not sure whether they used entheogens or not. It wouldn't surprise me because it's a way of quickening our own awareness to
Yeah.
take in. But the ritual action would have to be powerful. I mean, it was a dedicated body of priests to enact this, hereditary body of priests. Um, and they would have been perfectly attuned to what is meant when we talk about intensive ritual space. The generation of ritual space is the key to all these um, pre-modern religious or ritual forms. Okay, so not everyone is has experienced that in modernity, but there is a
Yeah.
distinctive formation, consciousness distorting or consciousness enhancing energy which emerges in a ritual context. And the closest we come to it today is with something like family constellations, where in a
Hmm.
particularly
Hmm.
intense constellation, the ancestors can be co-present and speak through their representatives. Okay.
Yes.
So that's a
Yeah.
very, familiar form um, of this manifestation of a parallel domain of being. So
Yes. I think that,
the problem is the sluggishness of our own awareness.
right.
Basically, that's what needs to be overcome.
Yes. And I would almost say that that is a piece of what's happening now within contemporary practice of astral magic in Western context is that as our awareness is starting to be more clued in to different modes of engagement with the world, we're starting to realize how much animism is actually present in the practices that we're doing that
Yeah,
before we may not have been as
yeah.
aware of it
I
prior.
mean, our challenge is to overcome our education,
Yeah,
in
our
essence.
indoctrination into things.
Yeah, it's had a kind of deadening effect.
So we'll go through a few of the questions, and then some of the other folks from that are IAM coordinators will join on there. And Sharon, if you're able to, you can get ready to spotlight folks as we go through it. So I'm just looking uh, for the questions. There was a question about how sure are we
Mm.
that the identification of the statues are planetary?
Um, for the line horoscope, we have descriptors for each one.
Mhm.
Okay. For the colossi, um, this site was tumbled down. It's been the subject of 1890, I think, first excavation. And since then, it has been very intensely studied, especially in the 1930s. Huge amount of work was done on the identification of the figures. So that required very careful sifting through debris and matching, very careful matching of pieces. And with that, you build enough symbolism to pretty well. There was a debate at one point whether Antiochus was next to Zeus or on the end,
Mm.
but very detailed examination, kind of on the micro level of the cracks and everything, has now assigned the pieces. So we're fairly sure that that is the sequence, the planetary sequence as represented by the colossal statues. I would say it's,
Yeah,
pretty
so it's
sure,
pretty
pretty
certain
sure.
now.
I don't know what the percentage, 80% or something, it's
Yeah, I mean,
quite
archaeological
high.
statistical analysis of it.
Exactly.
Um, there was the proposing, could we say that the quality of the site is Persian, but the function of it is Hellenistic?
Um, yeah, I mean, as I was saying, this kind of terraced with steps leading to it, a kind of fire altar. It all looks very Persian to me. Um, but it's distinctly Hellenistic as well. I don't think there's anything like this in Persia. I can't think of anything quite like Mount Nemrut elsewhere. I may be wrong with that, but I'm not an expert on Zoroastrianism, but I can't think of another site quite like it. Um, so it definitely is a blending. And when we say blending and when we say Hellenistic, by the way, we're talking about in the Bronze Age, Mitanni, Hittite, Luwian, Mycenaean cultures. And after the Bronze Age collapse, we're adding in the Phrygians, the Celts. Um, and although the Hellenistic kings themselves were satraps of the Achaemenid Empire, local governors, for instance, in Caria, it was the Hecatomnids. They were an indigenous Anatolian royal line who were entrusted with satrapy. They were never Hellenic, but they eagerly adopted Persian architecture for their own sacred sites.
Mm.
These grand stairways up to the site of Lebronda, for instance, and its terraced platforms is absolutely characteristic of Persian architecture, although the dynasty itself had nothing to do with the Persians. No, go figure, kind of.
So
They were
this one,
syncretistic through and through.
yes, I mean, it's quite synchronistic prone, isn't it?
Mm.
Syncretic prone. This was a question about some of the other work that's been done around the lion horoscope. Um, your thoughts on Neubauer's analysis of the various dates for the lion horoscope and his suggestion and most agreed by academics that corresponds to 6th of July, 26 BC. Your date of 109 BC seems too early for the investiture of Antiochus I, as he was born in 98 BC.
Now is the investiture of Mithridates the first, his father. That is, the problem with some of the early dating is they tended to drop off one of the planets or um, were more easygoing with the sequencing of planets in order to get a date. The work of Maurice Krins has no compromise in the sequence. As I say, it's generated from the software program. Um, so it's a far more up to date. I mean, get hold of his paper and see what you think. He's given all the logic, the steps he took, software he used. He also comments on Versleys and the earlier calculations around the lion horoscope. So, he has taken that into account. And I just defer to his own because he did the calculations, and they're quite elaborate. He's a trained architect, which I'm not, so that's a big help. And he worked on the site for something like 10 years. Again, which is very high level of exposure to the dust and rock, so to speak. He is very knowledgeable about it. He founded the International Nemrut Foundation, so he's the founder and president of that. And he's written a number of papers, so I defer to that as the most up-to-date, most complete analysis we have.
Amazing. Would you be happy to put up again the very first slide that you went through, or an earlier slide that you went through that was about stuff that related to animism and naturalism? There were a few questions that people had about that. So one was, that if you could speak more about totemism and analogism a little bit. And, I think that it was covered in the way that you were talking about ritual action
Yeah.
and the asymmetria that you were going for, or the symmetria that you were speaking about But would you say anything else about any of that to help people understand it a little clearer?
Um, I would just reiterate, for instance, I didn't mention commensurability of symmetria when we discussed this,
Hmm.
but it does fit in with this because if symmetria is a quality uh, in which reality was imbued by the creator deity, the demiurge, as related in Plato's Timaeus. It is an intrinsic feature of the perfection of reality. Because in the Timaeus, he describes how the demiurge turned and looked into the Cora, the source of everything, um, and sought to mirror its perfection in the visible universe as he created it and imbued it with soul so that you can, the symmetria as an efficacious force is an example of totemism. That's to say, it's efficacious by virtue of sharing qualities with perfection. And on a lower level, you can say, for instance, that certain Apollonian metals, flowers, colors are efficacious by virtue of sharing qualities with the deity Apollo.
Hmm.
Okay. And they can be efficacious in their own nature because they're associated with the god, but they can be even more efficacious when they're assembled into a figure
Yes.
that is assembled from those suntamata to become a symbol. Okay.
Yes, which is why a lot of us that have worked within like an astromagical context for a long time
Mm.
have been trying to put pieces together that it relates more to techniques around animation of statues, that is more interrelated to things that come from a theurgical tradition and whatever was inspiring it as well than just a form of natural magic
Mm.
primarily, because
So the other part of that then is what is the ritual process
exactly.
that should accompany the assemblage, so to speak. You
Yes, and
know,
we have, I think, when you look at textual reference, you have hints of that, but the interiority of that and sometimes the more explicit aspects of it are not so
yeah,
obvious.
yeah.
And that's why people in the last 20 years or so that engage with it more within a Western context, all of us have been trying to fill that in, find what works. But I think it resonates more with things. The last little bits that before we take the slide down, I just wanted to
Mm.
scan through, and then we'll have.
I saw a question
Yes,
briefly. Somebody asked about where was Regulus.
yes. Hmm.
Um, so if we just quickly go back to the star map, um,
Yeah, thank you for catching that.
yeah, so Regulus was sinking in the western horizon just as this planetary formation formed on the eastern horizon. So it was on the other side of the tumulus. Okay, so Corin's describes Regulus as acting like an agricultural marker star, like Sirius in Egyptian civilization. So it would have its apparent rising and its apparent setting, and that they were like markers of the solstices and the equinoxes and so on. It was like a pillar around which the agricultural uh, seasons could be organized. So Regulus had a role within Hellenistic culture or in Mesopotamian culture, from which it was borrowed, similar to the role of Sirius in Egyptian culture. So specifically, as this formation rose at his investiture, um, Regulus was sinking on the western horizon. Okay. And we noted, in fact, that, for the western horizon, the West Terrace commemorating his father still had a link to the eastern horizon. So it's almost, there's like a larger symmetry here. It's like the once and future king.
Amazing.
They're united in the king rising and the king going into the west. They're like a mirror image of each other, mediated across the top of or through the tumulus. And if it's mediated through the tumulus, possibly they're actually buried at the center of it. Because, most hierothesian are mortuary sites. So maybe we'd be able to tease out another layer of meaning if we could confirm that, yes, they're actually buried at the center of the tumulus. They, so to speak, preside over this dance of planets and stars through the mediation of ritual from the center of the tumulus. Now, the point I was making at the beginning is that when archaeologists look at this, all they see is the grandiosity of the conception and the execution. But surely this level of precision goes way beyond any needs of show. I mean, you cannot account for it based on the need to impress an illiterate population. It makes no sense whatsoever to say that this is just grandiosity at work.
Yes. I
The
mean, I
the
know that we
the
spoke. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Peter.
I was just going to say the precision in the use of Babylonian star tablets to make these calculations. I'm not sure how you'd even begin, frankly. But obviously, they had astronomers or astrologers as part of their kingdom capable of doing this kind of advanced projection and then engaging in the engineering of the site according to them. I mean, I find it breathtaking, frankly.
It is. It really is. And I think that you're right on there, knowing a lot about the Mesolithic and Neolithic sites that are here in northern Scotland and going across to the Northern Islands and the Western Islands.
Yeah.
You also get a very strong sense of archaeologists tend to fixate on their purpose as being for demonstrating grandeur, and that
Yeah.
they sort of step off around that, often because they're often only interested uh, in like north, south, east, west alignments. They don't
Yeah.
really consider very much as it relates. It's only as
Yeah.
skyscape archaeology has kind
Yeah.
of become more recognized in the archaeological community that they're paying more and more attention to this. And it makes sense because astronomy, and particularly if it's recreating ancient skies, is a different skill set than archaeologists generally are trained to do. So it's why it is a little bit specialized. But yeah, I think a lot of the assumptions that are made there. And the other thing that I wanted to mention as it related to the slide is that at least with, and there are two sites, one being the Ring of Brodgar on Orkney, and another being the Callanish one structure on the Isle of Lewis. They both use landscape or integrate landscape. The sites are very particularly chosen in order to create these mirroring relationships between the earth, usually a circle of hills or mountains that are surrounding it,
Yeah.
bodies of water that are quite close to it, that are around, creating like an amphitheater like effect, and where the sky is mirrored in the water, so there
Right.
is
Yeah.
like this, and there'll be
Yeah.
a ring of stones that is in the middle of that. The
Hmm.
purpose of it, archaeologists are very slow to speculate on, and I understand they have a more conservative agenda, a lot of
I think
time.
archaeology has become so technical now. I mean,
Yes.
some of the techniques, are incredibly densely embedded in science. Have a tiny number of people capable of executing them.
Yeah.
DNA extraction, for instance.
Yeah. Because
Archaeology 30, 40 years ago, but and there's all kinds of deep scanning they're using and the ability to reconstruct what's under the surface of the land without digging it up. And I just feel that it's split into so many specialities now that if you're not careful, you miss the ethnographic overview.
yes.
There's no
Yeah, and I
one,
think
specifically charted with, okay, how does all of this fit together?
totally, totally. And I think that we made a trip. Several people here were on that trip. We made a trip out to the Isle of Lewis for the skimming of the moon last summer, and we're going to do it one more time while the astronomy is there to do it. And luckily enough, we can actually still have unmediated access to Callanish with respect
Right.
before their visitor center opens officially in July, and no one will
Yeah.
be able to get near them when they want to anymore. Um, but the point is that the living quality of these places stays and is still there for us
Yeah.
to, and the Kalanish stones in particular are, um, they have an ongoing life. Do you know what I mean? That doesn't
Yeah.
hasn't stopped since they were first constructed. But yeah, I just find one. I'm really impressed. I really appreciate you bringing up Gordon and his passing at the beginning because he was so fundamental to so many of our journey in the magical community and also held such a strong torch up for us to see the role of animism in the world. And I think he would be really pleased to hear more and more about the work that you are doing with all of this.
Mhm.
So it delights me as much as I know that it would definitely delight him. But I'm gonna bring a few people on to have a little bit of the last bit of conversation. And Natalia, if you want to join, if you can just pop your camera on, please. But we're gonna have a few people join that are also some of our program coordinators.
JD, Natalia, and six other kids.
Lovely to see that.
Oh wait, oh wait, oh wait, oh wait. Uh,
What's that? Oh, you got the deck as well. Wow. A
Peter,
fellow addict.
That's all
yeah,
right,
Peter,
Natalia.
Peter, totally addicted. Peter, could we go back to the slide of the
Yeah.
king shaking hands with,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, just, JD and I have had so many conversations about building relationships with deities, and I just wanted if you could share maybe just a little bit more with us about what your theories might be about the relationship
Oops, let
between.
me find that. Here, this
Yeah,
one.
I wanted to draw you out a little bit more on just what you thought the handshake might symbolize in the iconography and what we know about the relationships that rulers tried to make with the deities.
Mm. Um, when I looked at this issue in the cult of Mithras,
Mhm.
it was clear to me that the handshake was over an altar. It was literally a swearing of fealty.
Mhm.
And something like that seems to be implied because the handshake was not a normal gesture. Um, it's occurring in a highly ritualized context. Um, and I think fealty is a good word for it, but it's not fealty in a secular sense. It's not just a promise. This is a promise with repercussions. This will link a person to these deities in a way that for all time, part of their, I don't know what the word is because we lack one in modern life, but the car, which is the continuity of an ancestral line through time, is locking in with a person's unique car or identity for all time. Okay. So no matter how many lifetimes are lived, no matter how many reincarnations take place, the resonance of this act will always be a part of that person. And, you know, I've experienced stuff like this doing a lot of energy healing. Very often people are coming for energy healing because they're obsessed in some way by a presence that will not leave them alone. And yet they have no biographical connection with that. No memory and no biographical connection in their timeline. So this notion that we are all, so to speak, under the umbrella of our own ancestral lines and inheritors of everything that they have done, and therefore it like weighs heavy upon us in some form, shaping our day-to-day lives, is true on in an even more powerful way for those ruling elites. And, you know, you can begin to see some of this in both its positive and its extremely negative dimensions in today's news. And that certainly aligns with some of the cases I've been confronted with. I say confronted, not that I could do much about it, because it is a connectivity on such a fundamental spiritual level that it transcends biological lives. And that's what this ritual apparatus is setting up, setting in place and energizing. You know, it's kind of a for all time deal. So it's a little more than a regular handshake is what I'm trying to say. I don't know if that helps. Oh, you're muted there. Yeah, you're muted.
I just had an electional question, which is obviously sometimes we'll try to do electional astrology with moon in the first house. This, you sort of presented this idea that clearly this time was elected in some sense, but it's hard to tell. Do you think that this was based upon sort of earlier Babylonian astrology that might not be house based, or do you think there was an intention to get the moon into the first house?
There's a big issue around what calendars were actually in use in the Hellenistic kingdoms.
Yeah, and I
Again,
wouldn't think this is referring to a horoscopic astrology. This is more of
planetary magic.
Actual appearance
Yeah.
in the sky. I think also going back to someone made a comment around it, and also is fundamental when you understand how ancient peoples were really paying attention. The ridge line, the surrounding circle of landscape features is really primary to how they are measuring and trying to understand what is happening within what the sky is telling them or doing, or what is being talked about in the heavens. So I'm sure that within this site too, the ridgeline and the mountains that surround it, they will all be storied and have a quality that is very important to the ongoing and unfolding of why that site is chosen, you know,
Yeah.
and also what is appearing behind it and around it at these times would have been of importance to them.
Yeah. In fact, when we had a short conversation before we started, and I mentioned the Hittite site of Yazilikaya, um, eh, which is like two deep grooves, natural grooves, clefts in the rock, several meters long and wide. The Hittites have carved all the deities in sequence into these clefts through the rock, which unites them with the polar stars, the circumpolar stars. And again, it's a ritually, imbued space. It's a space to be activated. But the Hittites were there maybe 1800 BCE. But these sites were already old before the Hittites came. So, this conception of the landscape as a living, breathing um, personage for multiple layers of civilization is certainly true. Yes. The elaboration of, the landscape is filled with stories that capture its particular resonance with the people who inhabit it. So, as you say, the myths and stories of the surrounding landscape, many of them are lost now, unfortunately. So, trying to reconstruct the ritual landscape as it would have been lived, in Hellenistic times or even in Hittite times. We know the Hittites gave all the mountains names. They had, and there was a ritual that needed to be conducted for every one of them. They all had to be honored, and they had thousands of gods, and they had this calendar, and it's amazing that they ever got anything done, frankly. For the density of ritual activity they were engaged in, every mountain, pool, waterfall, on top of the temples that 30 or 40 temples they constructed in the capital, Hattushas. Every god they encountered on their, expanding their empire was assimilated into their pantheon wholesale with the ritual and the language in the native language. And very often in the Hittite text, you say, the priest is like doing the ritual, and it says here he's enunciating words that we no longer understand. They're from another culture, but they retain it. It's totally assimilated. They don't attempt to find gods that they have and then assimilate the gods to unify them. No, they're just all, it's like, just come hither. It's an additive ritual process in which the entire landscape, everything in their domain is alive and being subject to worship and offerings. Total, it'll be, anyway, that's be my next big project.
Yeah.
Yazilikaya.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And just to segue into, I think that one other coordinator is going to join us. I'm just going to go ahead and add Natalia. Natalia's having trouble with her video, but yeah, just staying with that for a moment. I'm not saying that I know enough about this site in particular to say this definitively, but it's very likely that a lot of times what later is elaborated on in a place was already important prior to it being used by that. And just as an example, someone was suggesting the Neolithic technology. So again, we're going further back in time around celestial alignments. But what's unique about here in Scotland is that we have right now the oldest known timekeeping celestial alignment monument in a site called Warren Field. And Warren Field was created and maintained by the Mesolithic people that lived here 10,000 years ago. And it tracks solar, lunar, it tracks the lunistus, it tracks things that relate to the stars. It's a very fascinating site, and it's thought to be older than Çatalhöyük is. So these are hunter-gatherer people that were there 10,000 years ago. Equally, the stones at Kalanish, one, there is a cleft of earth-fast stones that creates a natural sundial that is exactly due south-north. There's evidence that that site was already being used to monitor a height of winter, height of summer, and a site of ritual offering at its opening as being like a prototypical cairn or a mountain with a cave. That again goes back to the Mesolithic people of that time. So it was already a site of great importance. That then the later people who came that were the Neolithic cultures that rose there, they existed kind of overlapping with each other, but they didn't intermingle to the extent that most people think. They built Kalanish there because it was already a site that was naturally speaking to them about the importance of landscape and the celestial world.
JD,
So I think it's a very old impulse, and it's hard to prove it with material record only, but it probably goes back, even further to that, to our pre-human ancestors,
It has been proven, JD. When I studied classical archaeology at Fordham, the very first thing they told us is all ancient temples have a Neolithic geological resonance.
Yes, I'm just saying even further back than the Neolithic. I think it's going really far back into our participation.
For instance, all of the temples of Apollo, which are along the Anatolian, the east coast of the Aegean, all of them have deep fissures underneath the temple where water changes level. Okay, so they have like a spring associated with them, but they also have intense geopsychic stress points. So that being on those sites affects the level or the level and depth of your awareness almost immediately. And for instance, when I go into the great temple of Didim, Apollo's temple of Didima, I can sense that the energy is vibrant in there. It's not because the temple was built after the Persians burnt it down. It's because the site has all the characteristics of all the other Apollonian sites in Anatolia, which is this deep geopsychic stress point has been selected and is advantageous for an oracle to operate on because it naturally lends itself to those shifts in awareness that are so important. So, all this ties in again with ley lines and natural energies. So these things are part of the Earth's grid. So for as long as there are sentient beings, we've been sensing these sites. So yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate that point, Peter, a lot. Natalia, I know that you're not visible to us now, but there was something you wanted to say.
Can you hear me? Okay.
We can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Peter. This was a really brilliant presentation. And yeah, I'm glad that you brought up Apollo's temples too, because that kind of ties into part of a question that I had around, so the stars of the Lion constellation, well, Regulus is fairly aligned with fairly well aligned with Alphard, right? With the Hydra constellation beneath. And then speaking on the temples of Apollo, like some of the Apollonian and Asclepian temples were aligned with like the stars of Corvus, for example, like the heliacal rising of those stars. And so, yeah, I was just curious about, I don't know if you can hear my toddler in the background. I was just curious about if there was any correlations that you found that might connect to Hydra or even to the Ursa major or minor constellations that are like directly above the Leo constellation, because I know those were also kind of prominent stars in a lot of like ancient architectural or temple sites as well, and other places.
No, I'm afraid you got me there. That's interesting. I didn't know.
Might be, oh, can you hear?
Yeah, no problem.
No, we can't hear you, toddler. Don't worry.
Saying hi.
But yeah, thanks for the question, Natalia. Was there anything else you wanted to ask?
Yeah, no, it's so fascinating. So it just gets my gears like turning around all of that.
I got one
That's
other
not
question.
uncommon for Natalia.
Just about the name. Nimrut is Mount Nimrut. Is that connected with Nimrod, the legendary
Absolutely.
hero?
Yeah,
And
someone posed that earlier.
Yeah.
When it got that name, I'm not sure. Again, it's an interesting name to select. Of all the names, you select one of the watches. Yeah. That suggests something, doesn't it? The giants,
Well, maybe as a place to end, a question I would ask that's a little bit broader, and it has two parts. One would be what has changed for you or become more obvious for you through doing the kinds of investigations that you've done in this last bit of time? Is there anything that you would maybe say has really awoken in you or become more apparent to you in pursuing your research in this way?
Yeah, connectivity is something which I'd never really considered. By the 1st century BCE, the Han Dynasty in China, during the 2nd century BCE, it sent out people to go and investigate the West, and they had created a trade route from China to Central Asia, which fed into arteries down into the Indian subcontinent, across to Egypt, across Anatolia. Of course, the Persians had created the Royal Road from Sardis to, well, deep into Mesopotamia. And the sheer volume of trade that was transacted on this Trans-Asian network, and the wealth that it brought in the sense of intellectual wealth, the exchange of ideas, of gymnosophists turning up in Alexandria practicing yoga. and the flow of Greek statuary into Indian religious artifacts, and the sense in which the Vedas and Indian metaphysics seems to surface in Neoplatonism. There's a whole missing story here. I was shocked when I discovered the biggest concentration of Roman coins in Europe, outside of Italy, is on the west coast of India. The biggest concentration of Roman coins is over there. It's astonishing. So there's an untold story about the exchange of culture, impressions, ideas, philosophies, which we can't quite put together, although there's been a couple of noble attempts at it. Yeah, that is something that kind of came to mind. And the impact of that on, for instance, cities like Smyrna, Ephesus, Sardis, and then the ripple effects from Ephesus, which wanted to create this marble civic architectural center, on a city like Aphrodisias, where the marble is cut and the fine working of stone takes place. all of a sudden, there's like mushrooms. So there's a cultural and material bubble which seems to escape most conventional history. And it must have had a profound impact on spiritual practice and religiosity generally.
Peter,
And
can
I
I just
think
ask?
that kind of discourse is markedly absent. And therefore, when I look at the Hellenistic kingdoms, I'm kind of, what am I dealing with here? Are they Zoroastrian? Are they pre-Zoroastrian? Are they Anatolian, or are they Hellenistic or Hellenic? Or is this Phrygian, or something else like the cult of Cybele with its Celts? The Galloi, castrated priesthood. What the heck are they doing in central Anatolia, for goodness sake? Let alone running one of the key cults, So, this sense of the diversity of humanity's spiritual and religious impulse is like, wow, as I explore these kind of connections in an attempt to make sense of just one site, for goodness sake.
It all comes flooding in.
Yeah, there's an untold story of the flow of our conceptions of the divine hidden in this, which badly needs telling. Yeah.
And I just want to ask like a quick follow-up question on that about connectivity and the flow of relationships to the divine that you're talking about, Peter, because I think for those of us that were raised in a more Judeo-Christian, we were taught that the divine isn't something that we can connect to.
Yeah.
That we can see God directly, that we can see that. And there's a very different epistemology, and like you can connect with the divine, you can connect to the gods.
Yeah.
And how have you worked through that?
Well, I'm kind of a pagan, so it's no problem for me. So for me, the crux of it is in the mystery cults of the ancient world, which is like my specialist subject, actually, which is what got me on to dealing with Mithras and Mithraism as a mystery cult within the Roman recension of it. And from there, I've been drawn into its roots in Hellenistic practice. So the mystery cults for me are the natural refinement and sophistication of primitive cults of possession. And possession is the one common spiritual denominator that unites all of humanity. So it's taken on so many unpleasant connotations with the rise of Christianity. But actually, this is the foundation stone of our spiritual inheritance. That ability to become possessed by deity is fundamental. And I totally agree with you. The church has made a massive effort to push that away as a potentiality to use a strict ethical dualism to, so to speak, condemn it. Ethical dualism is foreign to Hellenistic or thought generally. The gods are never evil. I mean, they're just gods. So the rise of a Gnostic dualism as an absolute feature, ethical feature of reality, for me has been it's like the fall from heaven. Because when you're possessed by this notion of ethical good and evil as absolute features of reality, you're lost to the spiritual dimensions of reality. It becomes a kind of narrow chamber in which you have to insert and hold yourself. So, again, it's one of the reasons why most of the great Christian mystics were kind of sidelined, as an embarrassment. Their testimony was unbearable to the political architecture that the church created on Constantine's foundation. Okay. I hope that's an answer.
I think that was very clear.
Yeah.
The last little bit was, in the title of the talk, we had the idea of the visible gods, and one of the reasons I love that so much, and was so happy you chose that as a way to run with this. Because I do think, and it sort of ties into the question that Danny asked, is that we become so accustomed from an Abrahamic, and I'm not saying it only within that context, but of thinking of God as something that is not in the world. Do you know what I mean? It might, or is like a presence that is somehow not connected to the material world as directly. Whereas I think that when you try to tap into a more animist way of engaging with these things, the mountains themselves become the god. You know, the rivers themselves become the god. The sky, the stars themselves become the gods. And it's not about some...
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem started with Plato's Timaeus, which is essentially a Pythagorean text, right? And he had to postulate a demiurge to get crank the machine to try and begin this process of articulating a universe that's fully imbued with spirit. So he postulates a demiurge. And once you reify this metaphysical conceit, you're in trouble, because you've now erected this overarching figure,
Right.
you know? I don't think Plato had any idea that people would try and think or read his philosophy as a reification of forms or the demiurge or anything else. I mean, he says it quite plainly in the Timaeus. He says, well, this or something like this is probably true. He actually says that. You know,
yeah, it's like a story to help us understand.
Exactly. It's just a model that he's building in order to say, turn the wheel over and get started on how everything is imbued with soul. You know, and how it all fits together, and the spindle of necessity flows through it, and you know, it's a machinery which has been reified through theology and become this kind of rigidified sense of a god, you know, as some father overlooking our activity. You know, it's totally fatal to almost any kind of spirituality. I mean, on a mundane level, of course, the mystics transcend that, but then, you know, they're outcasts. So who cares what they say?
Oh, thank you so much for what you shared with us today and for the conversation, Peter. And thank you, Danny, Natalia, and Sharon for helping as well. But I popped your website into the chat, petermarkadams.com.
Yeah, well, just Google me. I'm all over the damn place.
Yeah, exactly. People can find you. And is there any thought about when Visible Gods, Astral Ethnography, and the Cult of Mithras is gonna appear?
Well, I foolishly said I'd deliver the manuscript at the end of June. And then I got sidelined to write a review of this Freemasonry in the Haitian Imaginary. I just wrote a long review of that. It's a superb book, by the way. It really is. A photo essay by Leah Gordon. So I keep getting sidelined, you know.
Amazing. Well,
so
we will
find my reviews over on Paralibrum, by the way. That's the go-to place for reviews of modern esoterica. It's all over there. Yeah.
Of your books that you've written and published so far, do you have a favorite? I've always was curious. Is there one that is your favorite?
Gosh. No, I can't say there is, you know. I think
it's like choosing a favorite child.
Yeah, I think we're still...
There is always one, but we can't let them know.
I'll tell you one thing. We're still trying to digest the implications of the game of Saturn and the imagery of the solar busker. You know, I don't think, you know, even though it was reviewed in the august pages of the Renaissance Review, by Jocelyn Godwin, when it came out. The implications of this for our understanding of elite culture, of Renaissance elite culture, hasn't really taken place.
But this has been the entire challenge that the Warburg Institute has had since its founding, which is that there are so many people that don't want to admit how much magic was being practiced by the aristocrats of Europe. They don't. They are
They
still.
actually mentioned my work when they had the tarot exhibition
Did
over at the
they?
Warburg. Yeah,
Wow.
they didn't invite me, by the
They didn't
way.
invite you, of course. You're too.
I took a copy of the cards and the book, and I went over there, the two esoteric tarots, and I saw the head of the Warburg, and anyway, I was positively mentioned when the Solar Busker came up in conference.
That's good.
Maybe in 10 years' time, they'll actually say, well, maybe we should invite him next time.
Well, I just want to say
That
how much
is,
I admire your work as a scholar, and you are truly a brilliant man, and you are ahead of your time. And there are sometimes that's the
yeah,
price you
it's
pay.
called the bleeding edge, Danny.
Bleeding edge.
Well, yes, and thank you for making time to be with us, Peter. And
Oh, it's
we'll
been a
look
pleasure. It's
forward
been a
to
pleasure.
whatever is coming forth as it comes, because yeah, you are
I'll let you know when I have my Yazalakaya ducks in a row.
exactly. And yeah, your font is never gonna, I hope it never runs dry around things. And I'm so happy for you to keep sharing whatever with us. And just as a way to stay at the end, thanks everybody who's an IAM member.
Yeah,
If you're
thank you all
not
for
yet an
showing up.
IAM member, yeah, you can find out more in the link that's in the chat. But if you search for astralmagic.org/IAM, you'll be able to find it there. But thanks so much for those that have also joined us for today. And yeah, once again, Peter, amazing. And thank you for being part of the program for this year.
My pleasure.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Until next time.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Bye-bye.
Peter.
everyone.
Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
Bye-bye. Take
Bye.
care.